You can have the defendant, please. We're returning to 18B 1541-1. This is the State of Georgia versus Tiffany Moss. The defendant's present along with standby counsel. State's counsel is present as well. We're ready to resume with our proceedings. Just a couple of matters. Ms. Moss, did you prepare a document that you wanted me to see in camera?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Fitzpatrick, would you mind stepping down and bringing that to me, and I'll review it and seal it. Thank you so very much.
Your Honor, prior to the court addressing that, the state would like to be heard on this issue very briefly.
I wasn't planning on ruling on it right now, but I'd be happy to hear from you.
Your Honor, this may only be the only opportunity I have. I think in order to satisfy the law, the requirements that would have to be met in this case, and I base this on observation. The moment the court left the courtroom, standby counsel was in the holding cell with the defendant. So I think it's important, and I'm not implying any misconduct, but clearly there has been communication. There has been communication initiated by standby counsel. So I think the first inquiry this court has to make is this truly an expression of the defendant's will, or is it at the request of standby counsel? We also want to cite the court to the case of Wilkerson versus the state at 286 Georgia 201. It's a 2009 case that stands for the proposition of whether to grant or deny a defendant's post-waiver request for counsel is within the broad discretion of the trial court. There's one particular quote that I would give to the court from U.S. versus Salina, 733 Fed 2nd, 1208, a 1984 case that again reaffirms the point of judicial discretion, and it says, if at the last minute the defendant gets cold feet and wants a lawyer to defend her, she runs the risk that the judge will hold her to her original decision. And that's the state's position at this point.
What was that last citation for the second case?
U.S. versus Salina, 733 Fed 2nd, 1208, a 1984 federal case.
All right. Thank you very much. I can't inquire of Ms. Moss. I haven't even looked at the document you've just given me, ma'am, but this is or is not an expression of your free will and desire in this case?
It is, sir. It is, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll review it as time permits here, and we'll deal with it as the court sees fit shortly. We're otherwise ready to move forward with the trial of the case. Would I be correct in assuming that the next person is going to be the medical examiner?
That is correct, Your Honor.
All right. Let me just admonish the crowd. I would expect that the testimony from this witness is going to be potentially very difficult to listen to. If you doubt your ability to maintain your composure during the course of this testimony, you should probably excuse yourself now. All right. Is the state ready?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Jones is handling this witness.
Okay. All right. Ms. Moss, are you ready?
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
Please bring in the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed your lunch. We are ready to resume with the trial of the case. Ms. Jones, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the state calls Dr. Michelle Stauffenberg. And I'll swear you in, that's fine.
Right.
You raise your right hand, please. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give this court and this jury today in the state of Georgia versus Tiffany Moss will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right, you can put your hand down, please. And if you could please state your name for the court and for the jury.
All right. It's Michelle Stauffenberg.
And Dr. Stauffenberg, if you could please spell your last name for the court reporter.
Stauffenberg.
Dr. Stauffenberg, where are you currently employed?
At the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office.
What do your duties at the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office include?
I am a deputy state medical examiner there. My responsibilities include performing autopsies, writing reports based on my findings from the autopsies, giving court testimony in cases where it's needed, and any other responsibilities or duties, especially one of my responsibilities is teaching residents and fellows who come from the medical schools nearby.
Taking you back to 2013, were you employed as a medical examiner here in Georgia?
Yes, at that time I was the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for Fulton County, and I also worked part-time at Gwinnett County, substituting for Dr. Terry when she was not available.
If you could explain, I know that you said that you conduct autopsies. If you could explain to the jury exactly what a medical examiner does.
An autopsy, I like to think of it as a physical exam performed on someone who has died. So I'm a medical doctor and I examine my patients, and I do that in order to determine the cause and manner of death. So an autopsy may include examining the body with whatever clothing or items are with the body at the time. Then I do an external exam where I look at the skin, and then I do an internal exam where I look at the organs as they sit, and then I remove them and examine them, each looking for evidence of an injury or an abnormality that would indicate the cause of death.
Where did you receive your training for this?
I received my fellowship training in forensic pathology at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office in 2001 and 2002.
And where did you go to school, Dr. Stauffenberg?
I went to medical school at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas. I graduated in 1996 with an MD degree. Before that, I got a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Texas at Dallas. I graduated in 1992 summa cum laude.
And with regard to that, you said that you perform autopsies. How many autopsies would you say that you have performed to date?
I've performed 3,844 autopsies and external examinations, and I've also supervised 1,189 examinations performed by residents and fellows.
I'm assuming based on that, have you ever testified before?
Yes, I've testified 222 times.
Have you been qualified as an expert before?
Yes.
How many times, if you know, how many times you've been qualified as an expert?
222.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, the state would move that Dr. Stauffenberg be declared an expert in the field of forensic pathology.
Any exception?
No, sir, Your Honor.
Should be so qualified.
Dr. Stauffenberg, with that, I'm going to ask you some questions going back to 2013. Did you, in fact, perform an autopsy on an individual by the name of Imani Moss?
Yes, I did.
And how did you come to be the individual that performed that particular autopsy?
That was a weekend when Dr. Terry was out of town, and she'd asked me to substitute for her. And so this came in on a day when I was covering cases for her.
When this case came to your attention, how do you receive a phone call, or how do you know about a case of this nature?
Generally, one of the investigators from the medical examiner's office will call me first thing in the morning and let me know what cases have come in overnight we need to examine during the day.
Did you, in fact, receive a call of that nature with this case?
Yes, I did.
What did you do after you got that call?
I got ready to go to work. I went into the medical examiner's office and prepared for this autopsy, and assisted the investigator with receiving the body, and then I examined the body following that.
When you say you assisted the investigator with receiving the body. Can you tell the members of the jury how the body came to you?
Yes, the body came in a trash can. It looked like a new trash can. It still had the label on the outside. The body was inside the trash can with the feet pointing up. The body was wrapped in a trash bag that covered the entire body except for the feet. The feet were sticking out a little bit. There's also a strong odor of charcoal lighter fluid, and part of the body had been burned.
Once you made those observations, do you, as a medical examiner, do you also photograph and document those types of things?
Yes.
Is that one of the first things that you do before you make any changes to the body or how it has been presented to you?
Yes, a photograph or photographs are generally taken of my first view of the body. So receiving the trash can, opening the lid, and the body inside the trash can.
Once you observed the body inside the trash can, did you then begin to remove it and the contents of the trash can?
Yes.
And how did you, or what did you do when you did that? What did you observe, I should say?
The body was removed from the trash can, and it was wrapped in a trash bag, as I said, with the feet exposed. Inside the trash can, left inside, were some partially burnt charcoal briquettes that remained at the bottom of the can. At that point, more photographs were taken of the body, and we could see that there was burning on the outside of the bag. Part of it was melted. The feet and one of the hands were burnt, and so we started to remove the plastic to observe the body inside the bag.
Were you able to then, ultimately you said you started to remove the plastic. I'm assuming, do you take all of those external items off in order to get a better view of the body?
Yes.
And when you ultimately removed the bag, you said there was a bag, was there any other items, clothing items or anything around the body?
Yes, she had a folded up comforter or blanket made out of quilt squares that was folded up and in the top of the bag near her head. She was wearing some white and pink socks. She had on a pair of white underpants and a blue shirt. And those items were charred where they had been in contact with heat.
Once you were able to examine that, what is the next step in your examination process?
Once again, photographing the body, we remove the clothes and get some photographs. In this case, in addition to the clothing, she also had some duct tape wrapped around her in order to keep her legs and arms in a flexed position. And so the duct tape was removed, and all of those items from outside the body were transferred to the police department for further examination until all we had left was the body for examination.
Do you then begin your process with a complete external examination of a body?
Yes, the next step is to perform an external examination. We obtain x-rays and so forth. Anything preliminary is part of the external examination. With
regard to the x-rays that you did you determine whether there were any type of fractures or anything that you noticed in the x-rays?
There's no evidence of any acute fractures. In other words, at or around the time of death, there's no evidence of healing fractures that I could see on the x-rays.
When you observe this body, I know in your report you talk about post-mortem changes. What types of things do you look for in that?
When I'm looking for post-mortem changes, I'm looking for any evidence of the passage of time after death. There are certain changes that happen more or less sequentially. One of those is the formation of rigor mortis, where the body will become stiff and generally the limbs become stiff and you can't really move them, and it'll stay that way for a period of time, and then it'll start to pass. I look for color changes. As the body starts to decompose, it'll start to darken and turn green and red. I look for lividity. Lividity just means that once the blood is not circulating anymore, all of the red cells in the body sink to the lowest part. And if it's been only a few hours since death, you can move the body and the lividity will shift around to the next lowest part. But if enough time passes, you can't shift it anymore. It'll be fixed. So all of these things would be something I would examine as part of my external exam.
What type of changes like that, if any, did you observe in Imani Moss?
In this case, there was fixed lividity, which indicates that the passage of at least several hours has taken place. There was no fixed rigor. It had already passed. So that would indicate to me that at least a day or two had passed. She was starting to turn green and red and develop marbling changes. And there was starting to be a strong odor to the body, which also indicates the passage of time of at least a day or two.
Once you have done that, do you take body measurements of when you're conducting an autopsy?
Yes, we measure what I refer to as the length, because we can't measure it while they're standing. It's not really a height, but I measure the length of the body, and we get a weight on a body scale.
In this particular case, what was the height, or the length, I should say? As you said, it's not truly a height, but what was the length of Imani Moss?
Her body was 50 inches in length.
And do you also, when you do that, do you calculate a percentile, especially for a child, in what percentile they would be in comparative to other children?
Yes, I compare that to a standard growth chart. And for a 10-year-old girl, that length falls in the 5th percentile, meaning that approximately 95% of girls are the same height or taller, and 5% of 10-year-old girls are shorter than that.
With regard to weight, were you able to weigh Imani Moss?
Yes.
And what was her weight?
32 pounds.
And what percentile, did you also do a comparison into percentile for that?
Yes, according to the standard growth charts, a 10-year-old girl should weigh somewhere between 54 and 103 pounds. So this is at less than the 5th percentile.
Were you able, I know that you then continue your external examination. What is the next step that you do?
Continuing the external exam, we look for evidence of injury. So in this case, there was the acute burning of her feet and one of her hands and the right side of her body. That happened at or around the time of death, actually most likely after death. It appeared to be a post-mortem damage to the body as opposed to an injury.
Did you notice any type of marking or burn that was in what you attributed to have been in a healing state?
Yes, she also had a marking on her abdomen that looked similar to a burn in the healing stages. The skin was depigmented. It was lighter than the rest of her skin, and there were little dots on it where the skin pores would be, where the hair roots and the sweat glands would have been preserved. So this was a partial thickness burn. It didn't completely destroy all of the skin requiring a skin graft, but it at least took off the surface layers of the skin, which can regenerate from those hair follicles.
And with regard to that, we'll come back to that in a second because you're still doing your external examination. Once you made note of that potential recent injury, do you then continue and look at her head and other parts of her body?
Yes.
Was there anything of note that you noticed when observing Imani at that time?
No, there were no other significant injuries that I could identify that would have directly caused her death.
Okay, and when you say directly caused her death, are those the type of things that you're looking for in that external examination?
Yes. During the external exam, I look for evidence of blunt injuries, defects in the skin, other types of trauma, broken bones, and so forth, that would indicate some sort of trauma happening around the time of death.
With regard, you said that there was some discoloration, the green or red had come there. Did you notice anything about her skin that would indicate how long she had been deceased?
The color changes and the odor are generally associated with the passage of 1 to 3 days after death.
Did she have any what you would refer to as skin slippage?
Yes, she did. Some areas of her body were starting to show some skin slippage. It's one of the changes that happens as decomposition starts to set in.
Before you did your internal examination, did you notice if there was any type of, and I think you might term it a defect or something on her buttocks area?
Yes, she actually had an area on her left buttock where the skin was worn away through the epidermis and in through whatever small amount of fat was left on her buttocks. And so this was on the opposite side from where the burning was. So to me, this looked like something that may have been there before she died. Because of its location and because of the nature of the skin defect, it resembled to me a Decubitus ulcer or a bed sore.
Did you then move to an internal examination of Imani?
Yes.
And what, if you can explain to the jury what you do when you do an internal examination?
We begin the external examination by using a Y-shaped incision where you cut down from each shoulder to the middle of the chest and then all the rest of the way down. It's a cut that allows examination of all of the chest and abdominal organs, and yet following the exam you can close the body up and the body can be dressed in clothing and be very presentable for a viewing or a funeral. So once the body is opened, we can remove all the organs and examine them all individually. And as part of that process, I look at how they look as they sit. Is everything where it belongs? Has she got all of the organs a person is supposed to have? And then when I remove them, I can weigh them and examine each one individually.
Did you in fact do that process in this case?
Yes.
What do you begin with, doctor? What is the first organ?
It's listed in my report as beginning with the heart. I don't always examine them in the order they're listed in my report, but her heart was roughly the normal size for her age. There were no anatomic changes to her heart that looked like that she had heart disease. It looked like a normal heart.
Tell me what other, and you can go in the order in which you examined or the order of your report, whatever is easiest for you. Tell me what you would do.
All right. Going on from there, her lungs, just with the naked eye, looked to be normal size and weight. I also took some sections of the lungs to look at under the microscope, and we can talk more about that in a minute. I generally go on to the gastrointestinal tract. In this case, in her stomach, she had about a tablespoon of nondescript tan fluid. It really didn't look like anything resembling food, but just some nonspecific fluid in her stomach. Nothing else abnormal about her gastrointestinal tract. Moving on to the liver, her liver weighed 340 grams, and ordinarily for a 10-year-old girl, it should weigh between 724 and 967 grams. So her liver was less than half of what a normal liver should weigh. Her kidneys were also small for her age. They were below the normal, the lower cutoff for normal weight. Everything else was appropriate size and configuration, the uterus and fallopian tubes. Her spleen only weighed 30 grams. The normal weight for a spleen in a 10-year-old girl is 60 to 119 grams. There were no fractures of her musculoskeletal system, but her skeletal muscles were extremely atrophied. She looked very thin and had lost a lot of fat and muscle tissue, so that she was more or less skin and bones. Her endocrine system looked normal. There were no injuries of the neck. Her brain was about at the lower limit of weight for a brain, but still within the normal range. So the brain weight was relatively preserved, although several of her other organs were not preserved in weight.
And let's go back and talk about those, because you said you noted that the liver and the spleen specifically were smaller than what you would have expected. Let's talk about the liver first. Dr. Stauffenberg, what are some reasons for why Amani's liver could have been that size?
Generally, when a person has been starved, the organs and tissues that show the changes first are the ones where there's a lot of energy storage. So fat is going to go early on, muscle is going to go early on, and the liver is going to go because it's a storage site for glycogen. And so once all of the other sources of fuel in the body are used up, then the liver starts to shrink as the body uses that for fuel as well.
You indicated that you felt like the spleen was of a little bit smaller than normal size. Is that correct?
That's correct.
With regard to that, the brain, you did indicate that the brain, well, what was indicative of the fact that the spleen was smaller?
That goes along with all of the other findings in the organs. Generally, in starvation, the brain size is relatively preserved, whereas all of the other organs in the body will be smaller than expected.
Now, and I'm sorry, did you answer, let's turn to the brain, the size of her brain. You said that did appear to be normal size, or around this, what should have been a normal size for a 10-year-old. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what, if anything, did that indicate to you?
It's a natural response during starvation that the body will try and preserve the brain at all costs. So all resources available go towards the brain at the expense of other parts of the body.
Now let's turn for a moment. You said you went through those. Let's talk about just very briefly. You said you found about a tablespoon of non-specific fluid in her stomach. And when you say non-specific, what could that fluid have been in her stomach at that point?
Well, it wasn't recognizable as food, so it could have been something that was thoroughly digested, or it could have been a digestive fluid that had been secreted into the stomach. But there was really nothing that I could see in the stomach contents that resembled food.
With regard to that fluid, was there anything about that fluid that gave you pause as to whether that had anything to do with her cause of death?
Not really.
Moving on, when you do the examination of those, some other procedures that you do you typically test those potential gastric contents or any of her blood for any other unknown substances?
Yes, we generally draw blood samples during an autopsy and test those for drugs and alcohol. In this case, we tested for blood alcohol, which was negative, barbiturates, cannabinoids, benzodiazepines, cocaine, and opioids, and those were all negative. We also tested for ethylene glycol, which is antifreeze, and that was negative as well. In addition to the other specific drugs of abuse I mentioned before, a comprehensive drug panel was also negative, so there were no prescription drugs or anything else found in her blood.
Let me see if we can move on. You also, I think, submitted an additional fluid sample. Is it vitreous? Is that how you say that word?
Yes, vitreous fluid. That's the fluid that's in the eye. We sent some vitreous fluid off to the Shepherd Center laboratory for electrolyte testing. And specifically, we had it tested for sodium, chloride, and urea nitrogen. And generally, in the case of dehydration, all of those tests should be higher than normal.
With regard to this case, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. What type of results did you find in that regard?
In this case, we found that the sodium and chloride were more or less normal, but the urea nitrogen is very high. So either this is a case of dehydration where the sodium and chloride haven't read the charts and they're not elevated like the urea nitrogen is, or it's evidence of kidney failure or renal failure.
And when you say kidney failure, what exactly happens in kidney failure?
Well, the kidneys are supposed to filter the blood and take the wastes out and excrete them in urine. But if the kidneys are not working, then they're not going to remove wastes. Instead, the wastes will build up inside the blood, and it can cause illness and death.
Dr. Stauffenberg, you obviously conducted the internal as well as the external examination. I want to get to some of your findings and then go back and kind of discuss some effects of that. What do you then, in your procedure, make a summary of all of the findings that you find based on your internal and external examination?
Yes, I generally summarize all of my findings in an outline form and bullet points at the end of my exam.
And with regard to that, what was one of the things that obviously you noticed about the physical appearance of Imani Moss?
Well, she was extremely thin and emaciated. She had a starved look, and based on her weight and the loss of muscle mass and the fact that her organs were so small, compared to the normal charts, I was able to conclude from that she had died from starvation.
And in your capacity as a medical examiner, you rule a cause of death. Do you also rule a manner of death?
Yes.
And what was the manner of death that you determined in this case with regards to Imani Moss?
The manner of death is homicide.
With regard to that, let's go back and look at some of the findings that you did have. You mentioned, in fact, the burn that was in the healing state. Let's talk about that for a moment and where you saw that. You said that was located on her stomach area. Can you describe for the jury the size of that burn?
Yes, it was 8 by 8.5 inches.
And you said it was in a healing state. Could you tell by the type of burn that it was in that healing state, are you able to determine what degree of burn it would have been?
It would be something that would be called a partial thickness burn. That's generally a first or second degree, probably second degree because it looks like some of the surface skin was lost. But it's only a partial thickness, meaning it's not a third degree burn because there are still sweat glands and hair follicles left for the skin to regenerate from.
If it's a third degree burn, would that typically require skin grafting?
Yes.
With a first or a second degree burn, if you could, in your expert opinion, would that still be very painful and open to infection?
Yes.
With the type of burn that you observed, would that be the type of burn where medical attention should be sought?
I would expect that it should at least be looked at by a doctor. It's fairly extensive. 8 by 8 inches is a fairly large area on the body of a child, and it would be very painful. I would think that the first reaction when that happens would be to get medical attention right away.
You talked about that you examined the contents of her stomach. You did the drug screen paneling and looking for other things of that nature. Did you notice anything indicative of Amani Moss ingesting any type of poison or chemical in any way?
No.
Were there any signs that had occurred, either corrosive materials on her esophagus or her throat or anything of that nature?
No.
If you look then moving to let's talk about the starvation. You ruled this starvation. In your opinion, do you know and can you describe for the jury kind of the order or what would happen when somebody is being starved?
Well, the first thing that would happen in the early stages, they would experience hunger pangs. She would probably feel hungry. She would be asking for food, looking for food, craving food. Following that, the next step would be apathy, fatigue, not able to do her usual activities. And from there, she would become more and more listless, eventually lethargic, and mental status changes. She would not feel like moving around much. She wouldn't have much energy. There would be extreme weight loss that would be visible. And then finally, death.
Is your immune system in any way compromised when you're not, obviously when you're starving or you're not eating?
Eventually, the immune system is going to be affected. There's less ability to fight off infections in the later stages.
And I know you cannot put a number of days, I'm assuming you weren't able to put a number of days that Amani may have gone without food. But have you, in your experience, known of studies with individuals that potentially are without water or food?
Yes, there have been some studies done, mainly observatory or retrospective studies, where they look at people who have been deprived of food and water, and these studies are generally done in adults, where an adult has survived anywhere from 8 to 21 days when they're deprived of food and water. When they're allowed fluids but not food, they may survive for up to 2 months. In a study of 10 hunger strikers who were all roughly in their 20s, they found that they lasted anywhere from 53 to 73 days before death.
And you said those were all studies that you are aware of that were done on adults. Are you aware of any studies that have been done on a child?
No.
When you talked about the different stages of starvation and ultimately the fatigue, lethargy, things of that kind of nature, would that affect an individual's ability to walk or to get around?
Yes, she would have less and less energy, less ability to walk around. Even if she was able, she would be weak and probably unwilling. Even
if you are not ingesting food, are you still, as the human body, would you still be creating waste? Would you still need to urinate or defecate?
Yes. There's fluid that gets secreted into the stomach, and it's going to go through the GI tract just like food would. Any blood that's in the body is still going to get filtered through the kidneys, and so as long as the kidneys are able, they're going to keep making urine.
Again, to show you some photographs. I know you said that you documented your work in the autopsy that you did. In just a moment, I'm going to show them to the defendant first. I might have put you on.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Stauffenberg will go ahead and start with the earlier ones. I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit PS 107 and State's Exhibit PS 108. Do you recognize what's depicted in each of those photographs?
Yes, these are autopsy photos taken during the autopsy of Imani Mas.
And with regard to State's Exhibit P107, is there actually a number that's reflected in that particular photograph?
Yes, this photograph is taken with the unique case number assigned to this case, which is 13G-1007, which means this is the 1009th case reported to the Gwinnett County Medical Examiner's Office in 2013.
And with regard to that, is that a unique number that's assigned to this case and that you also use in order to keep track of your findings, and it is unique only to this case regarding Imani Mas?
Yes, that's a unique number used in our office. It's assigned to the autopsy report and any investigative reports, any samples that are drawn during the exam, and it appears in photographs that are taken as part of this exam.
And you said that both of those photographs were depictions of the body of Imani Mas. Is that when it was first removed from the trash can?
Yes, this is when the body was first removed from the trash can. So the body is still wrapped in the remains of the trash bag. And in PS 108, you can see part of the quilted blanket showing through a hole in the bag.
And are those fair and accurate depictions the way those that Imani Mas's body came to you and appeared on that day, November 2nd?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibits number P107 and PS 108, excuse me.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
These are photos prior to any medical intervention. Is that correct, ma'am?
That's correct.
PS 107 and 108 are admitted without objection.
And I'm going to show you some additional photographs. State's Exhibit PS 109 and PS 110. Let's see, I'll get it. And I think PS 111. Those probably are a similar grouping. And do you recognize the contents of each one of those State's exhibits?
Yes, these are also photographs taken during the examination of Imani Mas. In all three of these, the bag has been opened, the trash bag has been opened to reveal portions of the body. And in all three of these, we can see her knees flexed up close to her chest and wrapped around with silver duct tape.
At this time, are they fair and accurate depictions of the way her body appeared to you when you had peeled back part of the bag?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibits PS 109, PS 110, and PS 111.
Any objection?
No objection.
States PS 109 through 110 are each admitted without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. And then, actually, I think PS 112 is, do you recognize that, Dr. Stauffenberg?
Yes, this is also a picture taken from the vantage point of the feet and legs, showing the feet flex downward toward the soles and burnt. She's got a little bit of one of her socks showing, and there's duct tape around the knees.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of that vantage point of the way Imani Mas appeared on that day, November 2nd.
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would seek to amend into evidence State's Exhibit PS 112.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
PS 112 is admitted without objection.
Then the next series, State's Exhibits PS 113, 114, and 115. I think actually 115 may kind of go with 112, but do you recognize what is depicted in each one of those photographs?
Yes, in these three photographs, we have a picture of Imani Moss's body with the garbage bag and the comforter blanket removed. She's still wearing clothing, and the duct tape is still in place around her arms and legs.
And are each of those photographs, PS 114, 115, and 113, are those fair and accurate depictions of the way she looked prior to you then continuing your examination of her that day?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibits PS 113, 114, and 115.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
States PS 113 through 115 are each admitted without objection.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit PS 116 and ask you if you recognize that.
Yes, this is a photograph showing the left upper arm and part of the left side of the chest. And in this photograph, we can see that the arm is very thin, and it also has the remnants of duct tape across the outside of the arm.
And is that a fair and accurate depiction of the way Imani's arm looked that you used with that measuring tool on that day while you were performing your autopsy?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibit number PS 116.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
PS 116 is admitted without objection.
Just a few more, Dr. Stauffenberg.
All right.
State's Exhibits PS 117, 118. What do you recognize those particular photographs?
Yes, these are two more photos taken during the examination of Imani Moss as part of the external examination. And these are pictures taken once the clothing is removed. And in particular, in these photographs, we can see the healing burn injury on her lower abdomen. And we can also see in PS 118 the side view of the left buttock where she had some dry injury of that area of the skin, which resembles a decubitus ulcer.
And are those fair and accurate depictions of the way Imani Moss appeared to you during your autopsy?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibits number PS 117 and 118.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
States 117 and 118 are admitted without objection.
And then we're going to move to State's Exhibits number PS 119 and then PS 120. Again, do you recognize what is depicted in each one of those photographs, Dr. Stauffenberg?
Yes, in PS 119, we're looking at the bottom of the left foot, and we can see that the sole or the bottom surface of the foot is completely charred with the skin contracted and falling off the body. And in State's Exhibit PS 120, we can see the back showing the burning on the right side of the torso, and also that on the left side, the skin appears more dry without the burning, and you can see all the way through the skin to the dermis underneath as part of that decubitus ulcer.
And are those fair and accurate depictions of the way Imani Moss looked, particularly the foot that you have described and the backside of her when she was laying there during your autopsy?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time the state would seek to admit into evidence State's Exhibits number PS 119 and 120.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
States PS 119 and 20 are each admitted without objection.
And Your Honor, if I might publish these so that the doctor can explain some of her findings.
You may, with the television screen.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So you can look at these.
All right.
to use Thelma for this because I don't want to publish a photograph that may not be here, and they don't seem to be in sequential order, so we'll try not to
Okay.
make a mistake, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Sorry. That is, Dr. Stoltenberg, that is states PS 107, and I believe you described, is that, what is that?
This is a photograph of the body once it was removed from the trash can. It's still wrapped in the garbage bag. What we can see on the right side of the photograph is her 2 feet. And you can see that they're both very charred, but there's still some remnants of her sock on the right foot.
And looking at States Exhibit PS 108, is that a more close-up view? I apologize. Sorry, one second here. What is depicted in that?
It's a little closer view, but it's also turned a little bit to the side. But we can see in this photograph the body still inside the trash bag. You can see a little bit of melting of the plastic on the side that's towards us. Her feet, once again, over at the right side of the photo, and there's a defect towards the left side where you can see a little bit of the yellow fabric that's in that comforter.
And is that this area that you're referring to, Dr. Stauffenberg?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted into evidence as PS 112. I apologize, I don't know that I can, it's going to be sideways. It's frozen. There we go. And what is depicted in States Exhibit PS 112?
All right, in this photograph, the body is still partially inside the trash bag, but the legs have been partially exposed. So you can see both of her feet showing there, a little bit of the pink and white sock on the right foot. The left sock is a little more charred. You can see the duct tape around the knees, and you can see a little bit of the comforter showing on the right side of her body.
And looking at States Exhibit PS 109, when you look at this is a little bit closer view, but a different angle. What do you see and what is highlighted in the photograph that you took here?
In this photograph, we're looking at the left side of the body, and you can see the duct tape around the knees and connecting to the rest of the body to hold her in that flexed position. The garbage bag is still in place. Once again, you can see the comforter up above her knees.
And I'm going to move ahead here just a little bit. You indicated that ultimately you did, in fact, once you opened the bag and I think removed Amani from the bag, I'm going to skip ahead to States Exhibit PS 113. And is this after Amani had been removed from the trash can and the bag and comforter?
Yes. In this picture, the garbage bag has been removed. She's been removed from the trash can, and the comforter has been moved out of the way. So what we can see here is her body with clothing and the duct tape around her legs and around her body.
And you had previously mentioned something about the look that she had. I know this photo is graphic, but does it depict the way her face appeared to you at that particular time?
Yes, her face looked very thin to me. It's what doctors describe as cachectic. It's an appearance where the eyes get sunken into the sockets, and the normal fat that's in their cheeks is gone, and it sinks in so that it just looks like skin over a skull.
I'm going to show you what was previously marked and admitted into evidence at States Exhibit P116, and I think you indicated this was one that does appear to be a measuring tool. What do you use measuring tools in your examination for, doctor?
We use those in photographs in order to give an indication of what size something is when we take a picture of it. For instance, wounds and stuff are taken with one of those little scales next to it so that you can measure it and tell what size it translates to. In this case, the measuring part of this tool is 5 centimeters, and that's roughly 2 inches. In this case, we can see that her arm is probably more like 4 centimeters in width. So, picture how much that would be, and it just as an indicator that her arm is very thin. We can also in this picture see where the duct tape was removed across the outside of her left arm.
And ultimately, obviously, to complete your examination, you have to remove the clothing from the body, and also you ultimately removed all the duct tape. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit PS 117.
All right.
And what is the injury that you previously talked about, the injury in the healing state, is that depicted in this particular photograph?
Yes, that's on the abdomen. You can see where some of the pigment on the skin has been lost. That's part of this injury. It goes almost up to her ribs and all the way down to the groin areas on both sides. So even though 8 by 8 doesn't sound like, 8 by 8 1/2 inches doesn't sound like a large size, it actually is quite large on the body of a child. So this area had been depigmented and the skin has started to grow back. So it's all covered over now, but it hasn't completely healed in that the pigment has not returned.
And with regard to these markings here, where you see that and you see that, although those are discolorations, what was actually caused that discoloration?
That's from where the duct tape was placed. So she had duct tape around her thigh and the lower leg to hold her knee flexed.
What is this type of discoloration? What is that, and maybe some of these injuries? It appears to be injuries, but you, as a doctor, can explain what those are.
There are actually some larger areas, like on the end of the knee and underneath where the duct tape was, where there's some white areas. That's areas of skin slippage, and so that would be evidence of decomposition. So once the body starts to decompose, the skin will slide off. And since all the pigment is in the epidermis, once the skin slides off, all the color is gone too, and it just looks white underneath.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted as State's Exhibit PS 118. And is this a photograph in which you indicated that the Decubitus ulcer that you noticed on her left buttocks is visible?
Yes, it's that yellow area. You can see part of it on the side of her left buttock. So it's very dry, but it's not really burnt. The burning is on the right side of her body, but the there isn't really that much burning on the left side. This is something that was there before she was burnt. In this picture, you can also see burning of her left hand. You can see a little bit of her feet there.
Step down if you'd like to, Dr. Soffenberg,
All
if
right.
you don't mind. That would, so that they know exactly. And the ulcer that you were referring to, if you could point that out.
I'll point to that. This is part of the ulcer. It's on the side here and it goes across the back as well. I was also pointing out that the hand here, the left hand, is charred just about down to the bone. The soles of the feet are charred. And also you'll notice how thin her legs are. We saw that her arm was very thin before, but you can see what her legs look like, and that her ribs are very prominent in this picture as well.
All of those factors that you just pointed out are those indicators of the cause of death that you determined to be starvation.
Yes.
Looking at State's Exhibit PS 120, I think you talked about the back of Amani was where you noticed the charring. Is that what you were referring to and what is depicted in this particular photograph?
Yes, let me point this out to you here. Right here on the left buttock, This is part of the decubitus ulcer. So you can see we have skin, 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 and then there's just this fat. Oop. Is that,
No, you didn't.
I didn't do that, okay.
We hope not. I think you might have to reset it, Your Honor. Apologize.
But this appearance here is different from this appearance, where we have all of this dark, black, charred injury. So the decubitus ulcer on the left side where there's the burning, and then the burning here on the left hip and side of the back.
You indicated the charring, and I think there was one additional photograph, and then I think we're finished. This is State's Exhibit PS-119. You noticed extensive charring on the child's foot, on Amani's foot. Is that correct?
Yes.
And where's were the feet upward, did you say, or were they downward?
The feet were up in the can. She was head first into the can.
And with regard to the burning, I think you did say that there was was there any indicators that Amani was alive when the burning occurred?
No.
Okay. And based on your findings, was that a post-mortem infliction?
Yes, the burning is all post-mortem. For one thing, because she'd already started to decompose. Also, we did an examination of the inside of her airway, and there was no soot inside her airway. If she'd been alive while she was burnt, she would have had soot deposited inside her airway, and there was none of that. Another reason that I think these this burning was inflicted after death is because of the location. We're looking at hands and feet. And if somebody had been burnt that badly while they're alive, the reaction would be to pull back from it. But this looks like sustained burning and charring of just those focal areas of the body.
You indicated previously that the manner of death was homicide. What are the factors, Dr. Stauffenberg, that led you to believe that in this particular case?
The reason this was called a homicide is because she's a juvenile. And if a child has basic needs, they need to be met by somebody else who is caring for them. If they have a need for food, then the need should be supplied by a caregiver. If they have an injury or an illness, the caregiver has a responsibility to take them to the doctor for care. So in this case, the fact that she lost so much apparent weight without being either adequately fed or taken to the doctor to see why she's not maintaining her weight, then that would indicate a level of neglect on the part of the caregiver.
With regard to your final examination and your conclusions, were there any other medical issues, any other trauma, anything that you noted that could have caused her death other than starvation?
No.
That's all the questions I believe I have, Your Honor.
Cross-examination. May this witness be excused.
She may, Your Honor.
You're excused, ma'am. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, if I could have a moment.
Yes.
Your Honor, my records reflect that all of the state's exhibits have been admitted, and with that, the state will rest.
The state rests, subject to rebuttal. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the state's case. There's some matters that I need to take up outside of your presence or hearing. Please remember the instructions that I gave you previously, and you can go out with our bailiff.
Leave your pension, please.
jury's out. You're welcome to be seated.
I apologize. Do you mind if I stand? I'm having a spasm in my back.
That's fine, sir. Ms. Moss, are there any motions for my consideration? Ma'am, it's come to that point in time where you're going to have to make some decisions about whether or not you're going to be testifying in your own defense. You may recall we spoke about this some time ago. There are two options that you have available to you, ma'am. First option would, of course, be to choose to testify. If you want to testify in your own defense, you're certainly welcome to do that. If you do that, ma'am, of course, you have to understand that you would be subject to cross-examination. So you would take the witness stand. I would administer an oath to you. You could testify in front of the jury and say what you thought you needed to say within the bounds of the rules of evidence. And then the other side of that coin is, of course, that the state would have the opportunity to cross-examine you. That means ask you questions under oath and in the presence of the jury. The other alternative that you have, ma'am, would be to choose not to testify. If you chose not to testify, I would tell the jury that they should not make inferences hurtful or harmful against you for having made that choice. You should also understand that no one can compel you or make you testify in your own defense if you don't want to. With that in mind, ma'am, do you wish to testify in your own defense or not?
No, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Will you be presenting any other case, ma'am?
No, sir, Your Honor.
All right, I will bring the jury back in and let you rest your case in their presence, all right? All right, please bring the jury. Yes, sir. You can be seated. Thank you very much. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The state is rested, subject to rebuttal. Ms. Moss, call your first witness. The defense rests. And the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, with respect to this phase of the trial in any event is closed. There are matters that we need to take up outside of your presence or hearing. Those can take some considerable period of time, and we're here after a long week on a Friday afternoon. So my inclination is to let you all go early while we attend to those matters that you can't be a part of in any event, and we'll bring you back first thing Monday morning for the balance of the case. Even though the evidence in the case is closed, ladies and gentlemen, all the rules that I've already outlined for you still exist. You're still bound by them. Do not discuss the case with anyone. Do not allow anyone else to discuss the case with you or in your presence or hearing. Do not even discuss the case amongst yourselves. Do not attempt any independent research or investigation into any aspect of the case. Do not read or listen to any accounts of the case that might appear in the news media. will be resuming at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The reporting instructions for Monday morning will be the same as you've experienced through the balance of the week. Have a pleasant weekend. You can go out with our bailiffs.
Leave your pads and
Our jury's out. You're welcome to be seated. I'm going to take a short recess to consider what to do with respect to the request for ex parte proceedings outside the presence of the state. I'll make that decision, come back, announce what I've decided to do with respect to that. After concluding that, we will have our charge conference for the guilt innocence phase. Thank you all very much. We'll take a 15-minute recess.